What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
And so because of that, if you look at some of the stuff I was reading about the things that you put out, which is, I could have spent a long time to limit it down. But one of the things that jumped out at me was, it's something that I talk about, I call it the compression theory. I thought I came up with it, by the way, but apparently I didn't. But you talk about compressing time. I look at when you compress time, what happens is that's where you get energy that comes out of that. In other words, we don't have 8-hour days. We have 1 hour.
Here's something interesting. We've been told, again, this is going back to that whole conditioning thing we talked about a few minutes ago around productivity. We have been taught and told and conditioned to manage time. We need to manage time. You need to manage time. And when you go, going through university, we were talking about time management. It was a course when I did my MBA. Here's the interesting part. You can't manage time because this thing never stops moving. You don't have that option, right? None of us are God. So that's just a reality. What you can, however, do is manage the activities in the time that you've been blessed with. So if we think about this goes right back to what we were talking a moment ago. What are those high leverage? We talk about productivity in our space. What I talk about a lot with people is high leverage. Are the activities you're engaged with high leverage activities? We call them HLAs. And when I'm teaching and working with consultants and coaches how to go in and help others, one of the things we talk about is high leverage, because when a lot of times we go in and I'll work with a leadership team and I'll watch some of the VPs of whatever department doing things that they should not be doing, right? Yes, those things they're doing, the activities they're engaged in, they need to be done. I get that, but it shouldn't be them doing it. And so on a smaller scale for entrepreneurs, you maybe are, sort of the mid-range, what they call mid-sized business, maybe even smaller. We get caught up as entrepreneurs in those things that need to get done. And we go head down and the other end in the air. Now think about this. If you actually were physically head down on the other end of the air, you can't see what's going on up here. So the reality of it is, if you're head down, you miss out on opportunities and those things that help you grow, scale, and expand, which is what you want to do in the first place. You see, the reason you got into business, think about this for a second. The reason that you as an entrepreneur got into business was freedom. Freedom is defined in only 3 ways. The ability to do what you want, when you want, and with whom. That encompasses everything. The challenge for most so-called entrepreneurs is we get caught up doing what we're good at. We're a good consultant, we're a good graphic designer, we're a good plumber. But the challenge is we're doing, we're not actually growing, expanding, or scaling. So if we want to understand how to do that, we have to actually take ourselves out of the day-to-day. And I know that sounds really hard, and there's a transition, and it's a balancing act. I've been there, I've done it numerous times. Listen, when I moved from small town to big city at 19 years old, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I watched my dad work his backside off my entire life up to that point. And I vowed, and I was actually a little bit bitter as a kid because my dad wasn't home at 5:30. All my friends' parents came home. My dad was never home at 5:30. God bless him, he's gone now, but I didn't get to spend a lot of time with him because he worked all summer. He was, 12 hours a day more. In the wintertime, I went to school, right? And that bothered me. And so I'm never going to be an entrepreneur. And then I moved to the city and I got a job and realized how unemployable I truly was. And, my wife and I were talking. She said, it's too bad that you couldn't, and this is kind of a funny conversation. She said, it's really too bad you couldn't have a job. I'm like, well, why is that? She says, well, there's this amazing, and she pulled it up online for me and she showed me this opportunity, and it's an attractive opportunity. I said, I can't do that. I said, 7 years or 8 years ago, and I'm, for those of you who don't know who I am, you can look me up. I'm very blessed. If you had told me 20 years ago that at my age, I would have a 6 and 12-year-old, I would have laughed at you. But I have a 6 and a 12-year-old. And I have a place that I bought about 7 or 8 years ago in the Rockies that we go to. My wife's actually there for 2 weeks right now, hanging out with my little guy. But the point is this: if you work for even if you work for a large corporation, I had a chairman of the board and president and CEO. He was retiring, and they called me for coffee. I didn't realize the coffee was a job offer, and they wanted me to take over as president and CEO of a very large corporation. And I was very grateful, and it was a flattering opportunity, but I declined. Because when I decide on Thursday night this week, because in Canada we have July 1st, in the US it's the 4th. July 1st is our Canada Day, it's a holiday. I'm leaving Thursday and I'm going to our place in the Rockies. If you work for someone, even if you're at that playing at that level, you still have a board of directors to answer to. Right now, the only people I have to answer to are those people I have the fortunate privilege to work with, our clients. So if I don't schedule anything on Friday morning or Friday afternoon, I can go spend it in the Rockies. And so it's about this. Listen, going into business is freedom. It's about designing the life you want. These are some of the steps we're talking about here today that help you get there.
Yeah, especially as you talk about the person who's good at doing something, right? And now they're moving into to scale. They have to learn how to let some of that go.
It's hard.
Yeah, you know what? I think one of the reasons, Shawn, it's really hard is what happens is when I'm good at doing something, where do I get my self-worth out of? I get my self-worth out of doing whatever it is that I'm good at and performing or whatever. Now I'm going to go and take that and hand that to somebody else and let them go do it. And my self-worth, the way I get my self-worth has to shift. And I've watched leaders really get caught up with that. The ego gets in the way of going, well, if I'm not doing that, and it's like when I went from being the guy who brought all the sales in, to a point where I wasn't going out working with clients, I had people doing that for me. And at the end, I'd be at my desk going, so where's my value? Where's my sense of value? I can measure it based upon sales.
If we take that a step further, this is interesting. In United States today, or North America, Canada's the same thing. A vast majority of people that retire between the age of 55 and 65 die within 10 years. Do you know why? Because they've lost their identity. They didn't identify as Shawn, an individual, a father, a husband, a contributing member of society. They identified as a police officer, as a consultant, as a whatever it is they were. When you identify as something that is, you can lose. Listen, just because I'll tell you where this came. We were in a really beautiful, our office was in a beautiful building for about 10 or 12 years. And something had happened in the building, and the police officers were coming in and out and doing regular patrols in the lobby of the building. And I happened to come down the elevator, and one of the sergeants was in the lobby, and he said, "Oh, good morning, Mr. Shewchuk." And he'd gotten to know some of the folks in the building because he'd been there for 2 or 3 weeks. And I said, "Good morning." I said, "How are you today?" I didn't say, "How are things in the city with the police force?" I didn't ask that question. And he proceeded for the next 10 minutes to tell me about the high-speed chase, and this person got arrested and what it was for and everything, and all what his guys were doing underneath him because he was the sergeant. I didn't ask about that. I asked how he was doing. So when he retires, once he hits his 25 or 30 years and gets his pension, what happens? He loses his identity, right? And when we lose, human beings, we lose our identity, our value, and you just alluded to this, Mike, our value is not there. We don't place a value on ourselves because I'm no longer contributing value. There's, you know what I mean? So yeah. It's really, really interesting. When you look at it from an entrepreneur standpoint, you've gone into business for freedom. And in the book E-Myth, Michael E. Gerber talks about this. He says, just because you can go in and incorporate a company in your particular jurisdiction doesn't make you an entrepreneur. He says most so-called entrepreneurs are just technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure. And he's right. Right? Mm-hmm. So just because I'm a good plumber or I'm a good graphic designer and I go and start my own business doesn't mean that I'm actually an entrepreneur, because I'm very likely spending way more time in my business than I did when I had a job, and probably not making very much more anyways, because I'm not running it as a business.
Yeah, because what happens here is that you talk about this download. Number 2 is delegate, right? Right now, here's what I've seen, that most, and I'll be generous with this, but most of us are really bad delegators.
We are.
All right. And so what did you learn when you work with your clients? Is there something that you teach, train, guide, give feedback on that helps people strengthen their capability as being to delegate?
The first thing I'm going to say is this: just because whoever you bring on and you train them and you put your heart and soul into it, if they don't follow the process the way you do it and have done it for 10, 20, or 30 years, it doesn't mean they're not going to arrive at the same destination. And just because they don't do it the way you think they should do it doesn't mean it's wrong. And so often I've gone into organizations and even caught myself doing this, where we've brought somebody in and we've trained them. And then for whatever reason, that entrepreneur syndrome that we talked about a few minutes ago kicks in, and we look over their shoulder. And we're like, that's not how to do it. Well, no, you know what? Just move out of the way. I can get it done faster myself anyway. And once again, we've put ourselves back in that place where that ceiling is overhead. We know there's potential, but we can't get there because we've not allowed ourselves to. So you know what? Teach, train, guide, and part of leadership is, and this is an important one, a big part of leadership is to empower. If you're not empowering as you grow your organization, you will fail. Full stop. There is no two ways about this. So you need to empower the people you have the privilege to work with, the people that are on your team. Give them the tools they need. And I'll see leaders who in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s and even older, and they'll say, yeah, I hired this person and he or she is 30, but you know what? They don't get it. Well, guess what? Your parents and grandparents probably said the same thing about you.
That's it.
So you know what I mean? So
yeah.
let's empower them, give them the tools, and they may actually become more efficient at doing whatever it is that you hired them to do than you are if you empower them. And so that's the first thing I'll say when it comes to that side of it.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. And I think that we have to watch out for. And I love what you just said. It's like we forget how bad we were when we got started. We see ourselves as this where we are today. And what happens is whenever what I've watched with the clients I work with, they have a tendency to stumble is they think that teaching and training somebody is being critical as opposed to giving feedback. Guidance is feedback. It's not criticism. And feedback allows for growth. Criticism shuts it down.
Yeah, and if you criticize, if someone makes a grievous error, yes, you have to have a conversation. But if the only thing you have to say is negative, you're not going to have them around for long. And I don't know how many, listening and watching have kids, but if every conversation you have with your children, even if they've done something that they shouldn't have, if every conversation is negative, how do we inject positivity into that life? Because as they grow, they're going to learn to live from that perspective.
Yeah, very much so. It's the difference between criticism versus connection. Am I criticizing to do something to create connection with the person I'm interacting with?
And empowerment.
Yeah, empowerment.
I come back to that again.
I love that then. And then the last is automate, right? All right. And so it's especially with Chat GPT coming out, and it's just a common thing right now. Everybody's buzzing around. But I love the part about the example you gave about the spreadsheets. It's what happens is that was their comfort. This is what we know to do.
Yeah, well, I'll finish that story. It took me 2 years of working with those folks, and eventually she made the decision that it was time for her to leave. Because she was the one pulling back on the reins, to use the farm analogy. And the moment she left, the year following when she left the company, and it was tough conversations. Her husband and I had some really, really hard conversations about what was going on. And, even for a while, he was pretty upset at me for some of the things I had said. And I hadn't said it in a rude or disrespectful way, but this is his wife. But when she left the company grew by 127% the following year in a downturn economy. So, we start to understand that one person can have a very dramatic impact, right?
Very much so, from a limitation standpoint.
100%. Or the opposite, for that matter.
Or the opposite, from a destructive standpoint. So, I
want to delve, if I can, for 2 minutes on the automation.
Ask you, what have we not talked about that is important as we go to try to wrap things up here?
Well, I'll share this very quickly. There are a lot of companies or a lot of entrepreneurs, even mid-sized companies right now, that are doing far too much than they need to. Chat GPT aside, Chat GPT has been a big thing since November. And, one of the members of my team and I have spent a lot of time playing with it and testing it and trying to break it and doing those things. And it's been interesting. That aside, there are a lot of people today that are still doing things the way they did it 20 or 25 years ago. We have a platform that we use currently that a lot of our clients use that allows us to communicate with clients, that allows us to do some of the things we need to do from a marketing standpoint, that, if you don't have the ability to do that, you've got people or yourself who are sitting there and punching out emails or sending text messages. To manage social media, you've got people who are, so if you can bring everything under one umbrella, and that's something we've done and our clients as well, what happens is you give yourself the time to do those things that are important to you. Again, and we come back to this, to start to grow, expand, and scale. And that's the whole purpose of a business, is to achieve that freedom. If you can't grow, expand, or scale, you're just that technician having that entrepreneurial seizure over and over again. So I encourage you to examine that. The automate side is big. It doesn't have to be AI and ChatGPT, but certainly having processes and systems inside your organization, even if you're a 1 or 2 man show, having that, because it allows you to scale faster.
Yeah, I think it's even more important for those of us that are 1 or 2 man shows. I really do, because what happens is where it increases productivity. One of the ways it increases productivity is it increases consistency.
I'll share this for those of you. When we were a much smaller company, and the coaching and the side of things, I think we had 2 staff members. I put in a software platform, and of course, technology dramatically changed, but we actually wrote our own proprietary software. You don't have to do that anymore. You can take whatever you want and customize it. But back in those days, we had our own server. And I'm going to say this, having this even today makes us millions of dollars, because we're not caught up in doing those things that are really non-productive. We can now, in those 3 words, download, delegate, and automate. But the automate side's huge.
It's massive. That's massive. So wealth of stuff we talked about. All we did, as I felt, was we just tickled the subject. We could have dove deep in all of it. Shawn, it's been great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your guidance in the show notes. So we'll drop in your what's the best way for people to reach out to your website, email address, or what?
Yeah, and go to changeyourresults.com. I mean, I'm everywhere. You go online and look me up. I'm everywhere. There's tons of interviews, social media is everywhere. But changeyourresults.com, you can go to the store in there and take a look at books and movies and journals and all that kind of stuff as well if you want to.
Yeah, look around. So tools and resources to look at. This guy is a productivity expert. That's his calling in life, is to help people increase their ability to be more effective, is what I call it. Because that's where productivity comes into play. It's not just numbers on the top line. It's how do you be more effective at work, and I believe more importantly at home. Shawn, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Super.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.